Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Crime and Punishment Review and Recap series. We're carrying on with the modern period in this video. However, we are going to look at how far law and order has changed since the turn of the 1900s. First of all, let's look at the attitudes towards police. So in the 1950s and the 1960s, you get what is known as the golden era of policing, when public perceptions of police were very high. And this is reflected in popular cultural portrayals of police. For example, in the TV show Dixon of Dock Green, it features a very friendly police officer who is well liked by his community. However, in the 1970s, the trust in police starts to erode, and there are several reasons for this. The first reason being that bobbies on the beat, so those police officers that are walking around the streets in local communities, are now replaced by those in patrol cars, and this is largely due to the fact that they have a much bigger area that they need to cover, but it does mean that there is not those relationships that have been formed between the community and the police in the same way that there was in the past. The second reason is that some people are annoyed by the types of crime that police are dealing with. For example, traffic offences are often not seen as very serious crimes, and many people would rather that police were focusing on what they perceive to be real crimes, in quotes. Another reason that police trust has declined is because their crowd control tactics can often be seen as violent. For example, at the G20 meeting in 2009 in London, the police dealt with the protesters quite violently, and this was captured on TV, which eroded that trust further. And then there are allegations and sentencings for corruption. For example, in the 1980s, the West Midlands Serious Crime Squad was found guilty of corruption, as well as in Hillsborough, 1989, with the police tampering witness reports. There have been lots of developments in policing, though, since the turn of the 1900s. For example, in their recruitment, pay and training, the National Police Training College was set up in 1947 to better train police officers. There are now 37,000 female officers, whereas at the start of the period, it was exclusively a working class male profession. However, there are still only about 4% of ethnic minority police officers. They have specialised over the last 120 years. For example, the police now have specific anti-terrorism units, forensic units, and they also have to be trained to deal with very complex white-collar crimes. They have specialised over the last 120 years. They have also, their organisation has also changed, so it's gone from being 200 separate police forces in before 1964 to, with the creation of a more centralised system in 1964, taking that to just 43. There are calls for just one national police force, like there is in Scotland. However, there are pros and cons to this, so this has not happened yet. Their work in the community has also changed. So now police officers will often visit schools to try and educate the young people in those areas, as well as setting up neighbourhood watch schemes. Their weapons have changed over the last 100 odd years. There are now, alongside truncheons, there are now pepper sprays. Some police are taser trained. But only about 5% of our police officers are trained with firearms. Their range of work has also changed. For example, only about 30% of police time is spent doing investigation. It's mostly spent educating, being seen and being around in the community, as well as writing reports. Technologically, the police have also adapted. For example, in 1901, blood groups are discovered to help with forensics. You get fingerprinting. It was introduced, like I said, in the end of the industrial period, but it's increasingly used from 1902 onwards. And with the discovery of DNA in 1984, this has dramatically and significantly changed the way that police can deal with crime scenes. In terms of communication, data and surveillance then, telephone boxes were introduced in the early 1900s to speed up the communication between police, but this has evolved and changed into radio systems in cars in the 1960s, and of course today with mobile phones. Digital data has replaced the paper trails that police were using before to try and get data on people. So for example, today, police are able to see who has insurance at the roadside by using their computers. And we also have more CCTV and drones surveilling particularly large crowds to help with police work. Moving away from police then, because courts are also part of law and order, in each of these time periods, courts have undergone a very significant change since 1900. In 1971, you get the Courts Act, which scraps all ancient local courts. So all of those courts that we talked about in the industrial period and the early modern period are no longer here. For example, assizes, petty sessions, quarter sessions, they are all got rid of, and instead they're replaced with a Crown Court, which deals with serious crimes, and a Magistrate Court, which deals with less serious crimes. And both of those courts are under what is known as the Ministry of Justice to try and make it more centralised. So that is a very significant change. We've also got now the Crown Prosecution Service. Before, it was the responsibility of the police to gather enough evidence to try and take somebody to court. Now the CPS decides whether somebody accused can stand trial based on evidence. Women in 1919 are allowed on juries for the first time, and in 1920 you get the first female magistrate. There are now more female magistrates than there are male. Another big change. Juvenile courts are introduced in 1908 for 7 to 17-year-olds, and that's largely because of the work of psychologists who were studying young offenders and realised that young offenders needed more rehabilitation rather than just going through the adult court system. And juries have also changed during this time. In 1974, property restrictions are removed to try and make a more accurate reflection of society on juries. However, nowadays there are reduced trials by juries because juries are expensive and they're long-winded processes in court. And of course you have the problems of the internet, where members of the jury might do some research outside of the courtroom on a potential criminal or somebody standing trial, and this can of course make them not neutral and sway their opinion unfairly. So these are some examples of very significant change in the way law and order has progressed since the turn of the 1900s. In the next episode, we are going to look at the changes in continuity in punishment during this time.